Hello, everyone. Welcome to the HIV Cure podcast. My name is Sakhawa Marumo, and we are just here to break down the science to you and just talk about the importance of an HIV cure. Today, we are talking about a very important conversation, and now we're looking into the issues that are there and the importance of community, because we've seen how communities sometimes are left out when it comes to HIV cure research, or just when it comes to clinical trials, and they're only engaged towards the last phases. But today we're going to break that down. And I am with the beautiful Jessica. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Sakaba. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me and just coming in to explain to us the importance of community. And I know that you have been working a lot when it comes to engaging young people and communities through the HIV cure advocacy academies with IAS and AVAC.
Yes.
Yes. Kindly introduce yourself and what you do.
Absolutely. So my name is Jessica Salzwedel. I am a senior program manager for research engagement at AVAC. And I've led our HIV cure advocacy and research literacy program for about 5 years now. And part of that has been to develop an academy so that we can bring in new voices into HIV cure research. It has predominantly been in the United States and has predominantly been with treatment advocates, which tended to be more male and more white. And so kind of looking at some of the folks who are in the room, we wanted to make sure that there was a diversity of voices. And with IAS, we were able to develop this academy, which has been going since 2017, bringing in new voices, and you're an alumna yourself. But in addition to that, I also lead the community engagement program for 3 of 10 Martin Delaney collaboratories. So these are NIH-funded programs that bring together the U.S. government, industry, researchers from different academic institutions, and community partners as 4 pillars of the program. And I've been able to lead the program for REACH, based in New York, but has a substantial program in Uganda. For I4C, which is much more of a global hub, the Immunotherapy for Cure program, and then PAVE, which is the only pediatric focused cure research program, which deals with perinatal HIV. So excited to help lead and support those 3 collaboratories as well. And then AVAC is also part of the HIV Cure Consortia, which is helping to really have an Africa-led HIV cure movement.
Wow, you do so much in the HIV space. And thank you also for just making sure that you engage everyone across the world and in Africa for us to talk about these conversations and just for us to be the voices when it comes to HIV advocacy. And talking about engaging the community, today we're talking about the community involvement in HIV cure and vaccine research, why it's important for community. And we talked about earlier on, we talked about how now more than ever we need to now talk about HIV cure and how we can accelerate it, especially in Africa, looking at what has been happening with the USAID funding being cut recently. And now I want to know, why is it important for communities to be involved in HIV cure as well as vaccine research?
Community participation is central. It helps drive ethical research, but more importantly, it helps to understand what products are feasible and viable. And I think what makes cure unique is that with antiretroviral therapy, people can live long and healthy lives. And so when we think about cure and what cure means, we need communities to help define that, to help define what is the endpoint for the research. We need communities to be involved to help ensure that the research doesn't just live in labs, but gets translated out and understood by the policymakers to help it accelerate to the journalists, to family members, so that everybody understands what's going on. And so community participation in the process of shaping the direction of research is really critical. And I think, now more than ever, because all of cure research has been based on the fact that treatment, art, right, was readily available and stable and accessible. And it's even more important that we make these, in talking about advancing the research and the role that it plays. We talk about the community involvement and ensuring that the infrastructure around it, that the treatment is available. So even more how, cure is connected to the whole pipeline of treatment and prevention, and it's not siloed, and how strong community participation can be in all of that.
Mm-hmm. And earlier on, you touched a bit on the work that you do with IAS when it comes to the HIV Advocacy for Cure Academy, where I was a part of it in 2024, and I met you in Kigali. So then now, how can community voices help ensure that HIV research is ethical and safe?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways that communities play such a critical role. And unlike other clinical trial designs, there is a treatment interruption right now in HIV cure research because there is no test. There's no way to know if a person might control the virus off therapy or will have removed all of the harmful virus in their body from the intervention without going off of therapy. And so going off of effective therapy, right, can be frightening, it's a new experience, and it really goes against public health messaging. And so you need community members to be able to understand why it's important to the research, why it can be done safely. These treatment interruptions are heavily monitored. And so people are safe when they're going through and are supported. But you need community members to be able to talk about how to make that treatment interruption safe. And that may be not just thinking about coming in for monitoring, but also things like what are the supportive materials around disclosure, that are needed, or offering PrEP to partners. So all of those types of things are really critical for communities to understand and get involved so that they can help researchers design the next phase of clinical trials. In addition to, again, working with policymakers and others to help ensure that the research can move forward.
Okay, and also when you're talking about, policymakers, and we know that it's a very important, they're very important stakeholders, and that when it comes to community, they are the ones that sort of like drive participation and the sort of like the rules of how clinical trials should be done. And you touched on how some of the HIV cure research is done, like in Uganda. So can you please share with us some of the real world examples of some of the successful community participation in HIV cure research that has happened so far?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. There's several, I think, things. So you mentioned Uganda. Uganda has held, there has been some trials in pediatric populations. So in children who have been born, with HIV and were put on therapy very, very early. And this is reminiscent. This is a trial that was designed, I don't know if your listeners know about the Mississippi Child, which is a child that was born in Mississippi with HIV and was put on therapy within 36 hours of life, so after birth. And the child went off therapy and was undetectable for 18 months before that child rebounded. And so the trial was designed, it's an impact trial, which was designed to see if that was a limited experience, or if early intervention, early treatment could lead to durable or sustainable remission. And the trial was completed in several countries in Africa, but I'm just going to share the example of community involvement in Uganda. That took, the idea of the trial had a treatment interruption. So kids were put on therapy initially for 2 years. The thought was going to be for 2 years before going off therapy. And that took a lot of community involvement. Not just about understanding, the safety around interrupting therapy for a 2-year-old potentially, but also talking to the heads of the research institutions, talking to other community members and support groups for moms to understand what they would need, when their child was off of therapy, right? Because there's a lot of potential anxiety that could have happened. Talking to community leaders, talking to, clinicians who were not involved with the trial, right? But were seeing these parents and children in their regular healthcare settings, ensuring that there was mechanisms that people could talk about and understand, we need more information, and how do we get it, and what makes our doctors accessible. And so there was so much civil society inclusion and work with the community advisory boards with that clinical trial. And then on top of all of that, the COVID pandemic happened. So, they decided, it was not the time to delay treatment. So, or to interrupt treatment. And so with the community involvement thinking about, they actually continued the trial, and children stayed on therapy for an additional 3 years before treatment interruption. And so that trial was not just a sort of a big trial to have in the idea of a treatment interruption in children. The community's voices that played a role in the design of that trial, the communication around what a treatment interruption is, working with different stakeholders to make sure that the trial could move forward with everybody's understanding, was such a big part of its success. And I think is often talked about in addition to the amazing, incredible science that was done in that trial as well.
Yeah, and in this you mentioned that, it's children going into clinical trials. They have their mothers that are consenting for them. So then how do researchers ensure that community members understand their rights before they enroll and join these clinical trials?
I think community members play such a huge role in the translation process, and not just in helping to design informed consent documents, which we know right during the clinical trial process, but going and talking to friends and neighbors. One of the things we mentioned kind of going into this interview was that there are so many rumors happening right now, especially coming out of a major scientific conference where there were new cures announced and clinical trial data announced. So there are so many rumors, and it is the communities who are informed and engaged in the research who help put those rumors into context and can help potential participants and family members of potential participants really understand what's going on and are able to feel comfortable enough to join a clinical trial if that's what they want to do, or just understand that the research is happening and take comfort in that. And so I think community members play a huge role in translating what's happening in the clinic and making sure that that's accessible to everybody, and also making sure that researchers can make it accessible.
Yeah, and we know that, when it comes to just doing anything, there are challenges, and now we want to touch on some of the challenges that are there. And now looking into HIV cure and vaccine research, what are some of the challenges that communities face when it comes to engaging with HIV cure and vaccine research?
Yeah, well, I think now in the United States, the NIH, which has been the National Institutes of Health, which has been the largest funder of uh, research around the world, including HIV cure and vaccine research. We know that with the current administration, that vaccines are certainly under a microscope and under scrutiny. And I think it's even more important for communities to talk about and continue to highlight the amazing science and its benefits to individuals. There have been some incredible breakthroughs in therapeutic vaccines and that will help help advance towards an HIV cure. And it's critical for communities to understand the progress that's being made and also highlight and call for its continued and sustained movement right now. But I think, to your perhaps other question about just sort of getting involved is that when science is in the bench, when it's at the beginning, it's in its early stages, it's not yet, we don't know how many jabs it's going to be. It's not a product, right?
Yeah.
That in some ways it's hard to get involved in that because we don't know what it is yet. We can't talk about a thing or a product, but that's where we get to shape the science. We get to shape the direction and we get to have a lot of influence over, what it looks like in the end, what the product might look like. And so it's a critical time for communities to get involved because we are the connectors. We are the ones who bring the different silos together, the researchers and the policymakers who sit in different offices in different buildings who may not know what each other is doing. It's community who is the connector, right? Who holds stakeholder meetings, who goes into the rooms, who talks and translates from one to the other, who brings it all together. And that's what helps accelerate the research. So I think, when trying to get involved, there are working with community advisory boards, working with like I mentioned, some of the collaboratories or just your local, looking up some clinical trials and thinking about what community advisory boards to get on are all excellent ways to begin to get involved in the science.
Okay, and with these challenges, we know that it's important to build trust between community as well as the researchers, and that when you don't have that, then we won't be having that participation or people willing to participate in clinical trials. So then how can we build that trust between the researchers and communities that are affected by HIV?
Yeah, I think this keeps me up at night lately. There is so much trust that has been built up over the years that is quickly becoming eroded because of the current actions of the United States government, right? And so how do we build up that trust? How do we come back to communities, especially from the global north to the global south, right? How do we come up and say, we want to work with you again? And I think that's going to be really hard, and it's going to take a lot of humility, and it's going to take a lot of listening and understanding how to, not what we need, right? As building up these partnerships, but how do we help support what might get broken during this time or what our partners need. So I think I don't know that I know the answer.
Okay, yeah.
But when forming trust, I think that I guess from an perspective, I think all the time about how do I support partners to ensure that they get the things that they need. And I think trust is not transactional.
Yeah.
It's not about what I want and how do I get it and what do I need to give to get it, right? It's about support and showing up and doing things that are not for you, but right for all these other things. And maybe to give an example of a program, in the research academy, in the advocacy academy, which you've been to, we give everybody headshots, because some of the most important things are when you're building communications training is to have a headshot and the ability to put yourself out there in a professional way. And so I don't know that builds trust, but we try to always support growth in all kinds of ways. And maybe that's a place to start.
Right. And, there's no right or wrong answer or correct answer. Trust is a very dynamic thing. There's no one way answer to say that this is how trust can be. Because also even in communities, different communities trust you at different levels and for different reasons. So you cannot build trust the same way that you're going to build trust in Botswana with people in Uganda. So it's very dynamic, and like you said, that it takes time to also build trust. And one of the reasons, or one of the things that have motivated me to be part of the HIV Cure Academy was the fact that I'm a young person who's living with HIV, and I want to teach people about HIV, and most importantly, to advocate for a cure in Botswana and in Africa, because I believe that it's time. It's been there for the longest time, and I grew up living with HIV, and I'm a young adult now. It's about time for us to have that. So then what role do people living with HIV play when it comes to shaping HIV HIV research priorities?
Oh, I think when it comes to cure, everything, right? It's when, as treatment evolves, as long-term if you have, it's all about the definition. What does a cure mean? What does a cure product look like? As treatment evolves, right, you need people living with HIV to give input on what is actually the new goalpost, and what are people comfortable with? What need people living with HIV to share in clinical trial designs, to play a role in shaping the research pipeline. What kinds of products people want to see, and I think it's really at the center, and who to involve, what additional resources and support are necessary, not just in the clinical trial process, but after. As a young person who's lived with HIV openly, right? What would happen to an identity and to your identity, or to anybody's, right, if they are cured? What additional support would you need if you part of a new generation or a new sect of the community of people with HIV? And how do we support not just during that trial process, but everything that comes after that? And that, and so I think that those are things that we need, not just people living with HIV, but to learn from other fields like cancer, right? And people who are in remission, and, what does that support look like in that time frame? And how do we ensure that people with HIV are not just part of the conversation, but centered in all of those conversations? And those are the really important things. And I think there's that growing movement to ensure that, they are at the center, and that people with HIV are not a monolith, right? So your experience as the young woman in Botswana is not the same as a man in San Francisco, is not the same as an older woman in Florida or in London. And so making sure that, that we get the whole spectrum and the beautiful richness of all of the voices of people with HIV to talk about what they need, so that can all be taken into consideration.
Yeah, and now looking at these, it's 2025, these trying times, we don't know what's next. We've seen how some of the clinical trials have stopped due to funding, and there's just so much fear, and even some countries are worried about not having enough supply for the people. So then how then can community members help spread awareness about HIV cure research in such a way that it reduces stigma, because stigma is one of the challenges that are there in our communities, and one of the reasons why a lot of people don't even want to take part in like clinical trials.
Yeah. I think you never know what a timeline is. We are closer to cure than we've ever been. And there is some amazing data from recent clinical trials, including clinical trials in Africa, right? That are leading the field in the understanding of what it could mean to have a cure and have a durable remission. So having potential, with living without therapy, but undetectable for months to years. And so I think, people want to get involved, and it's scary to know that you don't always getting involved does not mean participating as a participant. That there are a number of ways to get involved, to shape the field, to have input, and that researchers want it more than ever. They want to hear community voices. They want to learn about what communities want, what they need, how it could fit into their life. And they are excited to work on the challenges because they've seen how that partnership has really bred such success already in the field and helped to accelerate the science. So I hear that stigma is incredibly prevalent and it can be a barrier. But I think making sure that people realize that there are many ways to participate, and one is as a participant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I've mentioned it a lot, especially on my TikTok, that I believe that an HIV cure will be found in my lifetime, because I've seen and I've read so much research that's happening. And recently, we have promising HIV cure research that's happening. So I do believe that a cure will be found. And you talked about participation, community participation. How then do we, or what support do communities need for them to participate meaningfully in HIV cure research?
Yeah, so I think you need, number one, to figure out an outlet, right? To figure out where you're going to participate. There's research happening all over southern and eastern Africa, and parts of Western Africa as well. So there are a number of places to find research that's happening and engage with it. So I think making sure we are offering connections. And then I think, making sure you understand what the science is happening. And there's great podcasts like yours, Sakabo, and other young people who are doing the work of helping to translate and put out accurate information. And I think if your listeners are interested in learning more or figuring out how to get involved, the Academy is a fantastic way to introduce yourself to HIV cure research and begin to find avenues and connections for continued work. Because in addition to the Academy, we offer a $10,000 grant. We do a grant program for alumni. So alumni of the Academy can apply. And so this year we actually have a fewer number of grants that are a little bit larger in money, and so as a grantee, you get to design a project that helps advance cure research locally in your area. And so we're really excited. We've had a project in Botswana that looked at long-term survivors and how to advance HIV cure in Botswana in that setting. And, there's been some really exciting work to help translate and put out videos. So I think if your listeners are interested, the Academy is just one way to get involved, but following local leaders like yourself is, I think, a great way to understand what's going on and finding some additional avenues of participation.
Mm-hmm. And, don't worry, if you want to know more about the Cure Academy she's talking about, I will share more information on it. And when the opportunity comes and they open up for applications, I will definitely share so that we have more people join in, learn, and also just accelerate the advocacy that is currently ongoing. And I would really, really love to see more young people in the academy and actually doing the work to advocate or to just make people aware, because we do know that there are some countries that don't even want to talk about HIV cure, or just mentioning that people are working towards an HIV cure. So that's also a great platform. And just to close it off, Jessica, I want to know now that we're talking about going into, you gave an example of Botswana, of the advocacy project, HIV cure advocacy project that was done. How can local organizations as well as activists work together with scientists to make sure that research benefits everyone holistically?
I think understanding that research is moving forward. So I think we don't have a cured product yet, but we can talk about ways to help, the research process give back. And that can be, again, having those voices talk about some of the other things that are needed, like the groups or like other, like other pieces, but getting ready for when a product is there and not waiting for it to be approved or, to show efficacy, but in advance. Communities can play a huge role in connecting stakeholders together to get ready and help accelerate so that when a cure product or strategy, the first one is found, everybody is ready to begin to, there are policies in place that help roll it out quickly. There are manufacturers identified to help get it to individuals to make enough products, right? So communities can play a huge role in just the getting ready process. And with like I said, we are closer than we've ever been to a cure. And so getting involved now is really critical to helping ensure that whatever strategy, whichever one comes first, that we are ready for all of them. And we have planned scenarios and we can help accelerate the timeline to get it from the clinical trial into delivery modes as quickly as possible.
All right. Thank you so much, Jessica, for joining us and sharing more insights when it comes to the importance of community and being part of the HIV cure research, and just the role that they play, as well as, at country level, what is it that communities and activists can do to accelerate the HIV cure research.
Thank you so much.